set up, I just want to give a little bit of context as to why Microsoft is on the stage in the first place, and also ask a couple questions. So I just want to see, just by show of hands, who's from kind of the IT side, if you could just show if you're an IT stakeholder, okay? And then who's from the OT side? Looks like, okay, so that's great to see. So just to give a little context, so my name is Jesse Allen. I'm one of our industry directors from Microsoft. And so I want to kind of broaden some of the best practices that we're going to share. We have a couple companies that are from the process manufacturing space, but autonomous operations can be applied in a lot of different ways. I personally worked on self-flying helicopters. It's a case study. You can look up the Bell helicopter. But even in supply chain, I worked with a glass manufacturer that asked us, how can I minimize moves in my warehouse when I take things off the factory floor and want to get them out the door? Because every time I touch it, we have increased risk. So I want to generalize kind of how you think about autonomous operations across your business, because there are a lot of use cases that we can share today. Thanks.
You can take advantage of not having 8 people up here.
So, this is our panel session. Is anybody got a burning question they want to ask? Right there. Now, what I want to do is get somebody up in the front corner here to ask the next question so that my colleague can run up. Now, go ahead, Tom.
Hey, thanks, guys. It was a really good presentation. My question is, and I'm not looking for any specific numbers or anything, but can you just talk a little bit about how much you were able to accomplish with existing technology, and then maybe a little bit about what your capital investments were like to get to these, make these strides, make this progress?
Yes, thank you. So I'd say, going back to first the investment question, for us, the only related capital is the ability to bring in instruments to be able to digitize this stuff. So bringing cameras or other things related to measuring the devices, and then the stuff on-prem that's being able to manage that, doing the modeling and simulation work that's helping us get calculations. So relatively speaking, in that case, for that specific unit operation, it's relatively cheap. Now, this is a POC at this point. Again, as you look to scale and you look to get to other portions of the line and other plants, other parts of the country, that number goes up, right? So we're not quite to that level yet, to be honest. So it's a place that we need to keep in mind, though, because again, as we start to look towards ROI, we're starting to get some peak on that. It may not make enough business sense for the whole organization to lean in if it's going to be a huge investment at every location. We know we're going to face hurdles that way, but definitely something we're keeping top of mind.
I'll say from our standpoint, and if you were here on Monday, you probably heard me say it if you were in one of the sessions with me. If you look at what you already have in technology, and we look across industry, roughly the number that people use is that we basically are using 60% of the functionality of what we already invested in. And it's why I emphasize the fact of starting at base layer. If you're going to get to the point where you're going to actually start spending some capital to do some things and actually look at AI and everything else, you better have your base layers working. And so, I would love to sit up here and tell you, we're great at BASF and we use 100% of every asset we ever buy. But the fact of the matter is, I don't think any company does. We get fixated on shiny things, and we want to bring in the next shiny thing. But if you don't get that base layer going, I'm telling you, you're headed for failure as far as trying to get to, that full autonomous operation.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Sorry, I'll add one more thing. There has been significant investment, at least on the software development side. So especially for us in deploying this autonomous controller for our processes, we've wanted the ability to be able to test the controllers that we're building with Bonsai digitally. So we want to know it's going to work, it's going to control appropriately before we put it on the line, where we can't afford to take any downtime today. We need 110% of all the capacity we have. So we have invested a good chunk of money in the 6 figures, low 7 figures, to be able to start to develop simulations of our processes these will be redeployable for other use cases, no doubt about it. But it's been very important to us in utilizing these tools that we feel 100% confident when we go out to the line that it's going to work. And these simulators that we're building, data-driven simulators, obviously could be deployed in multiple ways, but that has required significant investment for us.
Brad?
So Brad Bonnet with Wood. So I'm going to throw a controversial observation out here. I appreciate the fact that both companies represented that we need to start with a problem statement and identify a problem that probably your operators already know exists. I've heard a lot of interesting commentary about how actually the executive level focus on digitalization and technology has diverted energy and effort and even funds from solving the problems that we actually already know exist because of the shiny object syndrome. Do you feel like we're finally beginning to emerge from that we're kind of normalizing? I'm beginning to hear some words, and ARC has helped with this to kind of begin to measure some of that normalization. But I've actually been in plants where managers, OT and IT managers have, well, we had a plan, we'd identified problems, and then they got redirected because of a redirection of focus. So any feel on that, or do you feel that we're actually empowering the right things being done? And that will vary company to company, I know, but I want to kind of throw that out because that's something that I heard that I appreciate, because telling our people they don't know how to run the plant, that's not going to work, but finding the problems that they're having problem solving, and can we go find the right tools to solve them, that's a rational approach.
No. Okay, I'm going to address one topic, and I think it's in alignment with what your question is from sharing. Yes, we left the field of trying to go find pain points and try to find what our areas of improvement could be from an automation standpoint, and went into this catchphrase of digitalization. Okay, no doubt about it, and the focus went in the complete wrong direction. All right, it's no doubt about it. It's really time for industry as a whole, my company, all companies, to basically sit back and now say, all right, that was fun. We spent a lot of capital money. It was fun. We didn't get value. It's time to take it and say, I'm going to take the IT approach out of OT. I'm going to remove it, because that mindset does not work on a production floor. At least I can tell you it doesn't work for a production floor in a chemical facility. We got to go back to finding the problem and resolving it. And we can do a lot with that. We've done that now in BASF. We kind of started, you asked about turning the curve. Well, we actually started doing that. Some of what we've implemented now in Europe for our BASF has been very, very valuable to the business units. We're actually focusing on what the problems are, and we're fixing it. And as the gentleman in the back said, when we start looking at this and we start looking at the problems again, then you take your base layers and you start improving upon it, and you build that automation. And then you gradually bring that up. And that's exactly what we did in our plants between Antwerp, our plant in Switzerland, and Schwarzheide. That's exactly what we did. We started listening to exactly what the pain points are.
I do have just kind of a funny story on that point from the other side. So I worked with a CIO, and he said, I want to solve a problem using AI. So we brought in a company, and they said, we're looking at your OEE, and we can make a 10% improvement, but it's just using statistical process improvement. And he's like, I'm not interested, because my CEO told me I have to solve it using AI, right? So to your point, we did start there a few years ago, and companies like Microsoft realized this. And so we were always focused on selling to IT, and we realized, hey, it just doesn't work. They don't understand the factory floor, both the methodology and the problems, right? So my team and one of my peers in the audience, our team was actually formed because of this issue, because we kept getting into this POC purgatory, right? Where you would start a project, everybody's excited, you're checking all the boxes, and then you get to the factory floor and they're like, I can't use this. How am I supposed to implement this, right? So I think you're absolutely right, where now we start with engineers that worked on the factory floor. We work with plant managers, and we say, we won't meet with you until you can get a plant manager into the meeting with you if you're a CIO. And then we start with the matrix to say, okay, let's look at impact and cost and risk, and let's kind of map out the projects together, because if we don't do it that way, we'll just get to a certain point and hit a brick wall.
Yes. I can just chime on that. I think for anything to stick around, there has to be some courageous leadership. Someone has to put their skin in the game. No doubt about it. If courage is missing, no change will ever happen. But at least in Pepsi, what we have seen is a very clear, courageous leadership. Like, people believe it because they see a value. They trust the people that value will be generated. And when we are executing, we are not in lab. We go to shop floor. We sit in shop floor. And in shop floor, you don't get things done unless you don't listen. It's period. So unless we bring all the user stories together and we tie up before we even bring technology, I think it's the nervousness comes in implementation because we feel we have not heard enough. But if as a developer, if we feel that we have heard enough and we are taking all those opinions in true consideration, not just for the sake of slides, I think people come along very easily because result speaks. So courage comes when we take everyone along and we listen with an intent to act, not just to keep the other person happy.
Mike?
Yeah, so Mike Moody with BASF. And so this, just kind of looking, first of all, taking your takeaways of, don't go too big too fast, right? And the unit operations approach. If you look at it from where are we today, what is my plant as is, and where do I want it to be at some point in the future, you're going to see a gap, right? And then if you break that gap down into different aspects, you can start addressing those. And like Keith mentioned, it matters how far you get over time. You have to be competitive. But the key is that you're making progress. And if you try to go too big, you might not make any progress for a long time. So maybe take the easy wins. But I was going to get your impression of this. I was talking with somebody at lunch, and they mentioned if we layer some of these tools and things on top without getting the base correct, sometimes what we do is we hide problems that are there. And even though it makes things better, we never ever get to where we want to be because all we did was kind of cover something up, put enough mattresses that you didn't feel the lump, right? But it's still there. And so are y'all looking at it from that aspect, or?
We have three golden words here. We don't get that the work is done unless we have clearly articulated the game rules of who is going to operate, who is going to maintain, who is going to retrofit future versions. Unless we have figured that out, work is not done. So operate, maintain, retrofit are the three golden words we have heard in very clear terms from our controls team, our operations team, our quality team. Work is not done unless we have a clear answer for each of the three. Otherwise it's POC. Did I answer you?
So, can you hear me? Okay.
Yep.
I think all the conversation really resonate with me. ExxonMobil, focus on the value and really be cognizant of the total cost of ownership of the technology, and focus on the base engineering control. Where I am is more, I just came out of another conversation. Focus on human-centric versus autonomous AI. I just want to pose a question here is more, okay, let's say, Keith, we address all the base control issue. Let's say we actually do have the, like a cost curve to actually get there. I think there's a very good question about, because AI or the data science, there's always an element of unpredictability. It's not entirely predictable. It's a nonlinear process. So the question is, do we really want to go after autonomous operation? Or we really want to go after augment our workforce to become more capable and become more productive as the end game? So that's just a question. I just want to try to get your perspective on that.
I'll pay you for that question a little later, buy a drink. Yeah, I think, and I'm going to use another airline example that actually happened to me. And it kind of, I think, is going to kind of direct what my thought process is on this, because I talked about knowledge a little bit and keeping knowledge in our plants, in our workers. And the reason I say that is I sat on the tarmac, I actually sat at the gate at Houston Airport, Terminal B, for roughly 2 hours, because they have a completely automated system now for balancing weights of luggage to put on the plane, across the plane. Well, the automated system didn't work. And nobody that was at the airport that day working knew how to do it the old way. So we had to sit there at the gate for almost 2 hours as they call somebody out and drive in and come out there and show the team that was out there how to do that. Now, if that guy retired, I don't know how much longer we would have been sitting out there. So there's an aspect that we have to understand. That's why I talked about going fully autonomous operations. Yes, it's a great dream, and we want to head toward that target. But where do we land has to involve our people. It has to involve knowledge transfer into our people on why things are the way they are, why they're automated that way. We can't just automate and say, okay, y'all fired, go home. We don't need you anymore. You have to have a knowledge base. So we have to invest in both. It has to be invested in people.
Completely agree with Keith. This is not going to replace. We're not going to put people out there who we're not training to be on the floor. They're still going to have to go through that same level of understanding. And we should be open with how we're building it, some of the things that are there, so that when they see it make decisions, that they can understand what happened. But I think in that case, there still is a reason we want to push forward. To Keith's point, we're not going to replace our operators. Our operators still play a critical role. We can design our AI to manage, call it 80 or 90% of what's happening, but there's still those random events that are going to happen that we're not going to have a sensor there to figure out what's going on. You're going to need a physical person that understands it. It can go ahead and make those adjustments. But for that other 80 or 90%, as we talked about, we've got people that have been there 3 decades running these lines. We have pretty good visibility already that these AI systems are really good. So I think our first test that we did on our Cheetos process, we intentionally put it out of range, and within 12 minutes, it made 2 simultaneous adjustments, and bam, it was already right at the center. First time we tried it. As someone who's run these things for 7 or 8 years, again, Jorge wasn't there, so maybe he would have been able to outdo what I was thinking. But I looked at that graph, I was like, what? I was shocked that it made those 2 simultaneous adjustments, because it was already calculating what the first one was going to do and accounting for it. So needing that capability to step up for the challenges we're going to face in the future, that's where these tools can really help us. It may not work 100% of the time, but I have no doubt that the variation within our capability today is going to get much tighter, and it's going to enable us to do things that we can't do today, even with the best people.
And to add to what you're saying, I think that the difference a little bit now is the methods and how we're training those people, because they need to understand how that augmented reality, how that is actually working, so that they have a better understanding of why something happens. And so it's a different type of training we got to instill in our people on the shop floor. So, perfect.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, so that graph that you showed, or the slide about the levels of autonomy, I was just thinking about my customers and how we interact. And one of the exercises I would do as a leadership team is to say, what's the value going from level 1 to level 2? Forget about 1 to 5. There's a lot of value 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4. To your point, going to 5 might never make sense, or the investment to get to 5 might never make sense from an ROI perspective. But you can get an awful lot of value going from 1 to 2. So that's how I think about it.
I think, if I may, because I'm the panelist,
You are
I'm
the
in charge.
facilitator.
one of the things if you look back in time and you look at how we've got to where we're at, we've slowly built on our automation, right? And technology has improved, and we still built on it. And I think what we're watching is we're building upon what we've already made. What we're going to see is we're going to continue that trend. And you're not going to get there tomorrow. You're not going to get there next year, but we're going to start seeing over the next 10 years, we're going to start seeing some very strong cases for autonomy because we've incrementally improved. And that jump from 1 to 5 is really a jump from 4.5 to 4.7 to 4.8. So I'm a little bullish on it, obviously, but that's, yes, sir. You, yeah. You
I'm Jan, I'm with BASF from Germany.
He's also my boss.
It resonates a lot in me, also your question. Yeah? And we are talking since decades for now about autonomous plants. Yeah? But I would say also the parameters of the environment had changed. Yeah? So therefore, in the past, we talked about due to reduce the costs due to labor. Yeah? At the moment, we have the driver that we do not get the people to run the plant 24/7. So therefore, we need to be, on the one hand, be prepared that we need to, I would say, to automate more, to be ready that we get less people, but we need also then to see how we can skill them up to the level that we need them. Yeah? So I would say the environment is changing, but I'm fully with Keith that we need to implement the tools that we are having. They are highly developed, and also in Schwarzheide, we saw that we implemented controller performance monitoring, alarm management to a higher degree as it was established, and it helped the plant a lot. So it means also we need really to drive that these technologies are really deployed and also in use. Yeah? And then coming then to the next level is also not to consider, just to consider the technologies that we need to deploy. It's also what does it has impact on the skills, but also on the regime, how you run a plant. Yeah, so therefore, this is also what we are discussing internally to come to a higher level there. But at the end, I would say you need to find for your plant and for your environment, your solution and the way to go there. Yeah, so, and this is not one fits all. I would say it's a journey you have to follow. You see that also with Pepsi. They have also some solutions in place, but I'm fully with you, Keith. We need to bring the basics in place and run it as best as possible, and then we come to a higher level.
I've got an extra chair up here if you want to sit up.
Is there any chance that I can get a copy of that video right after this? I just had my boss tell me he agreed with me twice, and I would just like to get a copy of the video.
I can just add. I can just add. Have a look into IC 61131. I know I think you are concerned that how come AI is treated like a classic control system, right? I think you mentioned one line which I think we discuss a lot in our team, that the uncertainties which are built in the model, how are we tackling it, right? I think, I don't know, everyone has to figure out their own way of tackling it. The best part is at least the AI community is accepting that the robustness as a parameter has to be structured. IEC has taken a first stand. At least IEC community has came up with a standard. We have a couple of booths talking about 61131 compliance. But in the chemical industry, at least the American Society of Chemical Engineering is also talking about how are we going to build control system certifications. Robustness is a work in progress. All the community who are working in uncertainty quantification has been taking advantage of this. We know all our MPC community has already tackled it. So it's not like we are in unwatered territory. It's just replacing the mentality of model-based system engineering to data-driven system engineering. We are not changing the boundary conditions of it. So it's a hope, it's a wish list, but I think the proof of the cake is in eating it. So we will see how it works.
That's a good point.
But,
That's a good point.
Just to wrap that up, one way that I guess a rephrasing of autonomous plants that I see my customers taking now is It's not about autonomous plants. It's about making a worker on his first day as productive as my best worker, right? So using AI to improve productivity of the workforce and improve quality at the end versus trying to cut people out of the loop.
Have we got any others? Anybody else want to ask a question? If not, I'm going to thank the panel. Oh, you want to do it?
So you guys were trying to make the perfect Cheeto. So now this goes back years when I was in college, taking a class on artificial intelligence, and it was one of the most complicated books I ever read, so I decided I didn't want to do that. But anyway, one of the stories that the professor was talking about was Campbell Soup wants to make the perfect cans of soup, right? And they were struggling, and their quality had just taken a dive. And they brought in a consultant and said, what's changed? So, well, we did have somebody retire. They said, well, let's interview him. So they went and interviewed the guy, and then they talked him into coming back to the plant. He said, well, if it's kind of cold outside, I kind of go adjust this and that. And if it's humid, I'll go do this and that. And he just had all these things he had learned over 30 years of operating that he would tweak based on environmental conditions outside and in the building. And so then they built like an expert model base and just kind of built a database of all these things, just kind of extracted it from me, built a system, and where they could tie the information directly in or input it, it automatically made those corrections. And someone had mentioned in one of the earlier sessions about we have to take that knowledge base, and it's not in the worker who can leave, but we got to put it in the systems that stay put at our plants. And I think that's going to be a big part of this journey is getting that information into these systems. So,
Well, Mike, to that point, what you had said earlier, and that really kind of resonated with me because he made the statement that you can't control what you're not sensing. But when you get that knowledge base, then you get those sensors put in place that you can control off of it. So that is key. You got to identify what pieces of sensor data is not there. And that's just a learning curve as we go along trying to do these things. Is you gotta figure that out, and you gotta figure out that way. I mean, hopefully, if you got to bring a retired person back in, they say no. But I mean, that's what you got to.
Charge a pretty hefty fee, I hope. Yeah.
Just one correction. We are making perfect Cheetos for you.
Yeah.
So
I've never been a Cheeto I didn't like.
Me either.
I just want to add that I'm actually coming from the data science and the AI part of the group. I really like what Jesse actually landed on. I was more trying to advocate. So we need to automate. We're gonna relentlessly automate, like for sustainability basis and for the future workforce. No question about that. I think what I'm trying to get to is maybe we can reframe, how we think about the future operation. Instead of calling autonomous operation, we continue to call it, automation. And it's a purpose-driven automation. Because as we start to talk about autonomous, we may actually there's a connotation that you're gonna take the human out of the loop. I don't think we're ever gonna take the human out of the loop.
Right.
That's well said. I mean, that is perfectly said. I mean, I think I like the concept of getting rid of buzzwords because it comes with a connotation. So, effective today, no more autonomous operations.
Jesse's like, oh.
Furthering automation. This session is now called Furthering Automation.
So to that end, just to amplify that point, we've taken an approach which is you start with a co-pilot, which is, hey, what does your best engineer do, right? And you try to mirror and codify as much of that behavior as you possibly can in software. So you start with a co-pilot. And then what you can start to do is say, well, parts of what this person is doing is pattern recognition, right? And workflow automation, right? If this, then that. If the If we see the temperature go up in the plant to this, I'm going to make these adjustments. Well, what's nice about AI is you can start to use that for pattern matching. So you go from a co-pilot to an autopilot. Still informed. I've taught something in the co-pilot, and now this autopilot starts to learn. And once you have enough autopilots, then you can start to talk about autonomous operations in certain roads, even though we're not going to talk about it anymore. but the steps to that are a lot less scary. And they get people comfortable with the fact that there's a real sense of engagement and actually agency. So we'll name co-pilots after people because you know what? If Jane is the absolute best at this particular part of the process, then by gosh, she wants credit for it. And you start to work through those steps and it becomes a lot less scary and a lot more acceptable. And all of a sudden we start to get to these types of gains.
Okay, last one.
Just one last, Jitendra Kadam, ExxonMobil. So I'm in this area of autonomous operation. Actually, we use the autonomous operation as a North Star direction, but our real goal is intelligent, self-optimizing plant. Make more money, be more efficient. Eventually, we will get there. But I think internally, we talk about self-optimizing plant.
All right. Okay, so with that, we're going to end the panel. Thank you guys so much.